Welcome to the Sunrise Podcast, powered by Sunrise Labs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making Bright Ideas Work, a podcast by Sunrise Labs. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the program. Today, we're talking about leveraging local resources with global networks. What does that mean? Local to global. We're going to talk all about it with our two subject matter experts today. We have Chuck Smith, the principal mechanical engineer at Sunrise Labs, with us. Chuck, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it as well. And we're also joined by Doug Browne, Director of Mechanical Engineering and Design Transfer at Sunrise Labs. Doug, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us on board.
Well, I am thrilled to have you guys on the show today unpacking this topic. So let's just start off here. Introduce us to what it means to leverage local expertise when it comes to medical device development. What does that actually look like in practice? Doug, let me toss this to you first.
Sure. Sounds great. Thank you. Well, first of all, at Sunrise Labs, one thing I have to say that I enjoy so much at Sunrise Labs is the definition of medical device is so broad, and the expertise that you need to bring to developing it is so broad. And we have customers who have come to us for, 3 instruments that they wanted to get done that might be highly complex. We have other customers who have come to us, a wellness device that they were really focused on $700,000 a year. And so that volume spectrum and complexity spectrum between something that's wearable versus something. But one thing at Sunrise, all of our full product development entails electrical integration, circuit boards, software, mechanical. It's not just, we're not designing just, high volume widgets. We're designing complex systems. Mm-hmm. And we know over that it's a global economy. It's a global world. In order to meet customers' cost targets, you're going to need to reach out to a wide spectrum of manufacturing base as well as engineering design base. We're humble enough to know we might not know everything, and we want to listen to our vendors. And the one thing we'll just say is that has worked out really well when we have a local connection that we're working with, allows people to meet, and we're leveraging the global capabilities to their fullest extent.
Yeah, I think that I was really surprised when I moved to New Hampshire. I didn't really stop to think how Southern New Hampshire in particular is well within kind of the halo of all the tech startups that are spawning out of Boston and MIT and all the other universities there, that there is a huge array of technical companies within a 1-hour drive of Sunrise Labs HQ. There's plasma cuttings, specialty coatings, injection molding. It's surprising how much stuff is hiding in the trees. And I've had parts picked up from machine shop in the morning, dropped off at a brazing house in the afternoon, had them picked up the next day and installed on a prototype before lunch, all within a very short distance. So I think that's one thing that's very surprising about New Hampshire is that we have all of these resources really close. And I think that's specific to New Hampshire. And I think a better example of the larger impact of this local to global is one project I was working on with 22 different injection molded parts. It had very thin walls, which can be something difficult to do. I was using an exotic material, and I had ultrasonic weld features that were about half the size of standard limits, so well outside of the normal range that this kind of a thing would be done in. And I worked with a stateside molder and partnered with a machine shop in Korea. So the molds themselves were made in Korea, were shipped back to the molder here. I stood by the injection molding machine while the parts were being run and the process was being tuned, doing fit checks, every couple hours until we got a result that would succeed for this hermetically sealed box that I was designing. And once everything was fine-tuned, these same molds then went back to Korea, where we could then mass produce the parts at a much more economical scale. And I was kind of there the whole time. And without that molder being here, I would have to trust a molder in Korea and I would have to, even if you're getting overnight air freight shipping, instead of having that 15-minute cycle on changing a parameter and testing, it would be a day. So it's something that can simultaneously save money and time.
That said, Sunrise will ship engineers wherever we need to. Granted, the whole world with COVID right now has been crazy, so it's more difficult. But Chuck is right on there. One aspect that's been great for Sunrise is, if we're able to have both the instrument and the consumable, then as you're looking at the critical features and trade-offs, you can sometimes, trade off where is the most cost-effective area. It's often, you want to keep the consumable as low a cost as possible. So the whole DFX, design for manufacturing, design for manufactured assembly, design for serviceability, in a ISO 13485 environment is key. But we want, as Chuck says, you want the engineers to be able to debate all the trade-offs, and that happens the world around globally. It is easier if you're able to tap local expertise. And so far, Chuck and I have been talking a lot on the manufacturing side, but that also goes on the design side. Again, we have about 80-something engineers at Sunrise Labs, 100 employees, but we also have specialists that we reach out to when needed, because there are some areas when it gets into the specialty electronics or sterilization of products, or we have optics in-house, but certainly in areas like we had a human heart booster that had to go 80 million cycles, getting the reliability of something to that specialized to make sure you've got it nailed. There's an area where being able to bring in and having that global connection of experts is huge.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, Doug. And from what you guys were saying, I think it's pretty clear that there are some benefits that come out of this process, right? And so I would love to hear more about some of the benefits from what Chuck was saying, just in a lot of different areas. But having that collaborative approach and that ability to collaborate, I think, is one of the benefits. But what are some of the other benefits that can come out of this particular process?
I think I've already touched on this briefly before. I think the biggest benefit one of the big benefits would be for our clients who are startups. Some of our clients are Fortune 500 manufacturers that have the production line, that have molding in-house, that already have a great deal of knowledge and vetted resources. So I think one of the big benefits that we can offer is for those startups that we have a lot of the resources already lined up that they don't need. They know, right. That they might be thinking that they wanted to do some injection molding, and when we find out they're making 100 units a year, that we can come back and say, well, no, injection molding is not a very economical process for that. Let's revisit and do thermoforming, and we can go a few miles away to the thermoformer that we have a very good relationship with. So I think that's something that is a big help here.
Or even 3D printed parts in those volumes. We're seeing more and more firms looking of using additive methods to get to market on there. But the key theme on this, it's faster to market with less iterations on your tooling. And another key aspect where we try to reach out and get the supply chain established and aligned early is to get that real material and real manufacturing process into the clinical units, into testing early. It just really greatly risk reduces the launch. And that is a key theme across all of this of trying to expand. I think I mentioned at the beginning of this, Sunrise Labs is a design firm. We're 13485 qualified. We deliberately are not a contract manufacturer ourselves. We can do clinical builds, but we are not a for volume for sale contract manufacturer, because the variety of products coming in. If we were our own contract manufacturer, we would not be tapping that global expertise that we can tap right now. And again, as on the theme of this, it sure works best when there's a local element to that conversation.
Yeah, you guys made some excellent points there on that question. And I guess I'm curious, what are some of the elements that a strong partner can provide? We talked benefits in the previous question, but when it comes to elements and what a partner actually does, what are some of those things that they can provide and bring to the table?
I'm going to do a little bit of a roundabout answer to that. In most of my previous engineering jobs before coming to Sunrise Labs, I'll do a new product every 3 to 4 years. And the other companies I worked for had manufacturing floors, had production lines. And so after doing the design of the product, I would be involved in automating the production line, dealing with first batch of RMAs. So there's a great deal of engineering support after the design is done. Mm-hmm. At Sunrise Labs, like Doug said, we're not manufacturers. We're not building these things. So when the design gets done, we often move on to another project right away. So now I'm working on 3 or 4 different devices every year, which is very exciting. And between the 80 engineers, each working on 3 to 4 different products every year, we're getting a vast array of technologies coming at us. And sometimes we're very familiar with the technologies, if it's a simple optical system. But invariably, something will come along in which we just don't know an element of the design. Mm-hmm. For example, thermal properties of evaporating fluids and with biological fluids evaporating. It's like, no, I never studied the process of blood plasma evaporating in college. There will always be something, with those 80 engineers, 3 to 4 products a year, there will be some element that comes along that we just don't know. And so that's where it's very important to have those partners, to have fluid dynamics experts who that's all they do day in and day out, and we have those contacts. Another example where I had a very complex, very large welded frame, and I sat down with the engineer at the welding house, and we side by side looking at the CAD model. He would go through and he would show me the fixturing method that he was going to use to set this up. And being able to do that, being able to be right there with him, we were able to say, oh, well, if this is a problem for your fixture, if I move this bar over half an inch, it does nothing to my design, but it eliminates one of the fixtures. And you can negotiate an improvement to the manufacturability to save, 10, 20, 30% of the cost of making some of these more complex components. And, there are a lot of companies that you can go to nowadays where you can upload a CAD file and click a button, get a computer-generated quote, and order something. And those services will not give you that interaction that I'm talking about, that you will be paying more for what is potentially a less functional part than by being able to interact with the people who are going to be doing that construction. Sometimes it's an engineer, sometimes it's the welder themselves who's been doing this longer than I've been alive, and I have to respect that expertise and be willing to admit that I can learn from that.
To add to what Chuck is saying, we've had a lot of projects that were global in nature, as well as there's also, and this gets tricky to recognize, there are cultural aspects. Many of our providers that we've been with for years who are local will tell you very openly, oh, we don't think you should go that way. Here, we suggest this. This better fits our process. There's definitely cultures when we're dealing with the offshores. You have to be careful that they don't want to offend. They're more hesitant to tell you you're wrong, and we want partners that it's okay.
Absolutely.
I've settled this by going out after work in China and having a drink with the engineer working with his boss and saying, please, if you have an idea and you think I'm on the wrong track, please, put that on the table and tell me. You're not insulting me at all. I respect your input because they're such industrious people and they've seen so much. We want to build off of this, and they bring a different viewpoint to it. So recognizing that and leveraging that helps us immensely. But yeah, all our partner firms and partners we work with nicely challenge us.
Yes. And that's whenever I start working with a new vendor, I try to always have the opening line of, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what could be done better. Tell me what's, going to what can I do to make this better? And I think a little bit of humility and like Doug was talking about, kind of coaxing the honest feedback out of these people, is there are some vendors who don't want to say anything bad for fear of hurting the pride of the engineer, for fear of losing the purchase order if they're too aggressive with criticism. And I think that everyone working at Sunrise is more than comfortable with being told how to do something better.
That's a really great point, and I love that cultural aspect that you brought into the answer, Doug, because I do think that is so crucial. Just understanding how to best communicate with people, and we also learned that Chuck missed blood plasma evaporation day at college. Yeah, missed that class for some reason. I don't know, but just kidding, just messing with you, Chuck. But that really is an interesting impact, and it kind of dovetails nicely into what I wanted to talk to you guys about next, and that was just how to make sure that you're forming a collaborative partnership across every aspect of a project, because that communication aspect, like you brought in, Doug, is so important. So how do you make sure that everyone catches the vision for the final product and is on the same page throughout the duration of a project?
Well, I was going to say, it starts early in product development. We work with our customers to identify the supply chain and the top tier contract manufacturers early as we can. Some wait late in the project, but most work with us to get that identified, even if that contract manufacturer is just joining us during the alpha design, to join in design reviews and seeing and contributing from there and aware of what's going on. A key question we try and work with our customer up front is this a fairly complex mechanical system, and the in-process testing is really going to drive the needs? Is it a complex electrical system, and all of the electrical processing and testing needs are going to drive? Is it sterile? Does the product have to be sterile and made in a clean room? How does that come into play? All these factors. No one vendor can meet everything, so it's a matter of trying those trade-offs, getting it aligned early for them on there. And understanding what our customers need helps us select that we have the right vision for this product and how it's made. Volume comes in COGS. COGS, the cost of goods sold, has to be on the forefront of every engineer every minute of every day if we're going to meet that target on there. And that will affect the vendors. Is that in the right way? And are we bringing it to a finished box goods? And therefore, and the customer may have other needs from distribution and repair on there. It's a complex dance, but it's one you want to get aligned early so that those strong partnerships. And the other thing that's really nice, we have some partner firms we have worked with forever and a day. The path is so well worn. We know how to trade bombs into their format, bill of materials. We know how to have it real time, so they're seeing the bill of material real time. We have a shared PDM system or a CAD system, so the contract manufacturer can see real time what's going on. So it allows us to bring the manufacturing partners in earlier, or design specialty partners in earlier. But that's the goal, is to get their expertise into the mix while the design is still fluid. And that can be inherently messy because it means things aren't defined yet and requirements may still be changing. But in the end, it works best.
And I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here because Doug just reminded me of something. I have a soft spot for the startup clients that we have who are bringing into the world entirely new technologies, entirely new therapies, new diagnostic methods. A lot of the stuff that I find really satisfying is moving what was previously hospital equipment into the home environment. And so when these startup companies are trying that, doing all of this, there's a lot of tangential things that they're going to need that we know they don't know, kind of to turn that around. And that Sunrise is very happy to provide services, things like focus groups, human factors evaluation, industrial design, manuals, packaging, kind of all of those things are services that, we know people who do that or we do it ourselves. In regard to how we make a good connection with the clients to ensure that the work we're doing kind of meets their vision and their goal, and how to really make sure that we're moving in lockstep on that. We implement agile systems on a lot of these projects. We'll have daily meetings, brief daily meetings, to keep the client informed of what are our key achievements, what are the key blockers that we have, what are the next critical objectives that we have. We will absolutely make sure at very early on in the project, one of the first things that the Sunrise staff will do is look at the system, look at the application, and present to the client what are the risks. The risk may be schedule, the risk may be technical, the risk may be an unrealistic cost target, but we don't go plowing ahead to a finished design until the customer and Sunrise are in agreement as to what those crucial risks are. We also have a phased gate process where we'll have formal meetings and approvals at various points throughout the design and production transfer process to make sure that we're continuing to aim at the right target. Some of the clients that come to us will come to us with only a concept, not even a benchtop prototype. I'm working on something right now that we're developing the very first physical instantiation of a novel anesthetic device. And absolutely, when you're doing that, when you're building something that has never been built before, you're going to find out things in the design process and fabrication process that customer didn't know about. So you are absolutely going to need to change what it is you're aiming at. And so we have a formal requirements database that gets updated and gets put in front of the customer and formally approved at each of these gates, to make sure that we are tracking on the things that we consider the most important for that product. We might not be quite so attentive to exactly what Pantone color, is going to be on the box, or exactly what cosmetic texture will be put on a bezel, but those risky things and the key requirements, we'll absolutely keep track of those and keep them in front of ourselves and in front of the customer.
Absolutely. So one of the things about this process is that the first prototypes can actually be built while the learning and all of this sort of thing is still taking place. How does that benefit the overall process when you're able to get that done early? Tell me a little bit more about that and why that's beneficial, Doug.
Well, clearly, as you say, you want to learn early.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make your discovery early. You want to iterate early and fast. I give all my engineers mulligans, and we proudly put on the table each week what went wrong and what did we learn, because it is a learning process to get a device to work. That helps identify if there's expertise that needs to be brought to bear. It helps identify early what manufacturing challenges lay ahead, and therefore we can start talking early who will be best to go make something. But we want to learn early, discover early, break things early. That's part of our core culture at Sunrise, because ultimately the sooner we get to the real materials and the real electronics in there, we're able to really de-risk the project before we enter in where there's been large capital expenditures. We have a 3D printing farm and laser cutter that all our and milling machines and classic subtractive, as well as partners to make local partners to make circuit boards quick and rapid, because it is a key point. And that is probably one of the best fortes of Sunrise, is the ability to get a prototype in front of the customer fast. We will never beat one for one of my favorite projects and favorite clients, where one of my really strong mechatronics engineers was going to go to Poland for vacation. So I had him get a prototype done for the kickoff meeting. And kudos to our president, Eric Soderberg, for letting us do that at risk before the kickoff meeting. It has set a precedent we can't often match of having a prototype at the kickoff meeting. But that allowed us to learn early, and that has really become a core culture, is hit the design hard first early with a lot of different core ideas and be able to show and tease out, because it is a learning process. Our engineers get tired of us hearing us say this, is you want to do analysis, design, build, test. You want to do the right amount of analysis. You want to design it and get into CAD. You don't want to get into CAD too quickly. You want to build it as quickly as you can, test it, and that testing will tell you what you should have analyzed more to begin with. Now do it again. And a few spins through that cycle, and you've pretty well got all the teething worked out. Now it's ready to get it ready to bring in the contract manufacturers.
Okay, so I think I want to do a little bit bragging about Tomek, who is the mechatronics specialist at Sunrise that Doug was just referring to. We found out that after that initial kickoff meeting for that project, where we showed them a functional prototype, the team at our clients in their main meeting room at their offices wrote across the top of the whiteboard in big bold letters, "What would Tomek do?" So they adopted one of our engineers as their kind of mascot of inspiration and engineering.
Good point.
And I think, I said earlier that design is almost always a moving target. And Doug was talking about de-risking the project by establishing the functionality of some key elements. And that de-risking does something that a lot of clients are very keen on, at which it removes variability from the schedule. That we have, we can provide a much clearer idea of when things will be done and out the door, and that makes a lot of our clients very happy to know that. I have a couple examples of some early prototypes that came to mind. We were going to be building a $50,000 prototype of a refrigerator-sized piece of lab equipment that was going to have a lot of different touch points that the operator would have to go through, high and low. And before any designer sat down and started doing that 3D CAD model that was going to contain all the complex components, Doug Browne over there, he grabbed some tape, put it up on the wall, outlined the device, and started putting his best guess for things would go. And we would have a short person come in and try to make sure they could comfortably reach the top. We had a tall person come in and make sure they could comfortably reach the bottom. We found out that the original layout Doug came up with wasn't quite right, so we moved things around. And before any real engineering design had happened, before any models were there, we already knew one element of the device was going to be successful, which was proven later on when we had physical prototypes and did formative testing. So a $3 piece of tape can be something to get you one of those early prototypes. Another fun example, I love solving engineering problems on the cheap. We were designing a pressure vessel, and we had a critical to safety sensor in this pressure vessel that we were designing, that what was used to prevent 32,000 pounds of force from being generated inside the device. And we ended up spending $100 on a pool filter enclosure that was the same size of our eventual pressure vessel. And we were able to prove the functionality of this critical to safety pressure sensor with that $100 that $100 pool filter.
Wow.
The alternative that we did not do was spend $10,000 on a prototype of what we thought the real pressure vessel was, and which takes 4 weeks to get, and then try the sensors out. And so we were able to do that cheap solution, proved it worked, and able to work into the real enclosure a couple of minor tweaks that the sensor would require. Mm-hmm. So we worked that in before we even made that first real pressure vessel. So the alternative could have been we spend $10,000, wait 4 weeks, find out that it doesn't work, and have to make changes and wait another 4 weeks and spend another $10,000. And I know that all of the project managers at Sunrise would definitely get pale if I told them I just delayed the project 4 weeks. So I think those are a couple of fun examples of early prototypes that don't require plasma cutting and injection molding that got us real information that was needed for the successful development of the product.
I think those were some really good examples, and we've talked about contract manufacturers a couple of times, so I've kind of been itching to get to this question, because when it comes to choosing the correct contract manufacturer, what difference can this make in the long run in the process, and what are the benefits of choosing the right contract manufacturer, Doug?
It's huge on the alternate. Sunrise is like, throughout our careers, all of us here, most of the products we've designed have made it to market. They must make it to market to be of any good to anyone on there. And the contract manufacturer is key on establishing the right quality, the right cost, the right distribution on there to be able to get it, the right skills on there. And that's why Sunrise partners with several, because they're different. We recently brought a breast cancer tracking device to market, and we used a contract manufacturer as lead contract manufacturer that we know well. So first we try and align with their vendor base, their AQL supply, their approved supplier list. If there's skills that they don't have, like in this case, the part going into the surgical part going into the body in vitro needed to be sterilized. So we worked with another contract manufacturer that we knew that was able to make the sterile part, and then it gets shipped to the top tier contract manufacturer. So having that and having it established where, like in this case, we were working with a molder who was both one of our long-term vendors and their long-term vendor. So the path was well made. I know their tool maker designed well. We were able to go through and figure out gates and ejectors and slides and all the details on those to achieve what we need. And I just had the utmost confidence in them. So it was really nice that was a sub-tier vendor, if you will, who was known to both parties. Mm-hmm. But on the plasma unit that Chuck has mentioned that he was our lead mechanical engineer on, and lots of complex parts on it and different assemblies that had to be brought together. That one was heavily mechanically centric, and its assembly and then the ability to test it. Whereas on that product, the circuit board was much easier to outsource to someone else. We have other projects where the electronics are the predominant concern, be it, the type of circuitry and the connection and the antenna design and whatever there. And then we'll have contract manufacturers who really are an expert in that area, and the plastic housing might be the part that gets outsourced. Rare is it that the top tier contract manufacturer is doing everything, except for some of the firms we've partnered with who are, the larger CMs and the international Asian ones. They may have everything under one roof. But so it's not just selecting the right CM to be the top tier. It's working with them to get the sub-tier vendors aligned quickly. And again, ideally with ones that they already use, so we're not introducing too many new players into the mix.
I agree with a lot of what Doug was saying. There's a giant list of things that a contract manufacturer might need to be able to handle to develop the medical products that we're designing. The FDA has very strict requirements on traceability for inventory and production lots. Exotic components may have very lengthy lead times that require some thoughtful logistics. Being able to rapidly respond to engineering change orders. Frequently after a product launch, you're going to find out stuff when your device gets out in the wild. You want to be able to change it and document that change and keep track of which device is where or what revision. There might be a clean room requirement. You might have some sensitive optics that require laser alignment systems, and not every vendor is going to have that. I'm working on a device right now that requires ultrasonic welding. And we don't want to pick a vendor that has never done ultrasonic welding, a contract manufacturer that has never done ultrasonic welding.
Right.
Is if something goes wrong on the production line, you want someone familiar with the process who can, without having to stop everything and call up the client and get us involved, that you want people who are informed on the ground at the manufacturing site who can troubleshoot minor difficulties and fix things in a timely fashion to get the production line back up and running.
Yeah, I really like how you guys put that, and I think you really thoroughly answered that question, and I think that that makes a lot of sense. So one of the other big benefits is that outsourcing can connect you with an international network of vendors, right? So tell us more about that, and what that process can provide, and what it means to really be connected with that outside world. It's that idea that we've been discussing since the beginning, local to global, right? So tell us about that global aspect and how it can be so beneficial, Doug.
And Chuck will add, I'm sure, some color to a recent example he's had on some very large plastic being machined. It's just the international capability brings. So I was in Shenzhen, China, transferring a wellness device, a wound healing over-the-counter device. I was in Shenzhen, China for 3 weeks transferring that. So impressed at the industriousness of the people and the management's willingness that to throw a large number of people to solve the problem, that while you're there for those 3 weeks. So more happened in those 3 weeks because you just couldn't bring that number of tool makers and machinists and assemblers and testers together on there. It took, an effort on there. And the willingness to, like I say, to get done what was needed. So the advantage when something is labor intensive, it is hard to beat the ability to bring that many industrious people together at once. The area, and this is where the boots on the ground of the engineer who knows the product is key, is that many people helping all at once can be a little chaotic.
Sure.
And I mentioned the cultural and the communication challenges. This is where having someone who is a local, if you will, interpreter, they're working for the contract manufacturer, and they're there with you, helps immensely. We had this wellness device. There were a couple features in the part that were out. The management agreed, yep, we'll fix it tonight. Here, stateside, that would have been a welding operation in reforming that feature. But because they were able to bring a lot of people to bear, they remade the entire core side of the tool overnight. We're back up again molding the next day. That feature looked beautiful. All of a sudden, features that were in yesterday, though, elsewhere in the part, were now out. It took me forever to understand that they had rebuilt half the tool because they had the capability. It was not in my mental construct that was possible because there is no way you would bring that many resources to bear in a cost-effective way. So there's a definite advantage, and you just need to be able to utilize that advantage to its fullest. And expect the unexpected that way, that it's a different world, and they're willing to work. And, like I said, just very industrious and very helpful, willing to, offer, say that they can do things that, you really have to challenge back. It's okay to say no. And that's, that I can't get it to you for the morning or tomorrow. It's going to take a few days and go. So, but the ability to have that outsourcing. And so I'll hand it over to Chuck. He can talk about how key containment vessel that he's been mentioning, you had that all machined out of a billet, which was amazing.
I'll come back to that. I want to talk about your story a little bit. And I think that it's a wonderful cautionary tale. I mean, early in my career, I remember being beaten down by one of the product managers who was desperate to reduce the cost, and I found it was a Korean company that did an amazing bid on the parts, and they made prototypes and they sent them off, and the prototypes were great, and we did the big order, and the parts all showed up dramatically different. That there was clear that there was not inspection happening that was called out on the drawings, and it was a mistake that I have not repeated. That a quote that's too good to be true often is. So I think there's a couple of things that come away from that Sunrise is able to do. Number one, we know the vendors that kind of put their money where their mouth is, that will deliver according to print. If something is wrong, that they will take the time to correct it and do it right. And I think you also need to have, the engineers, at Sunrise who are doing this. If it's a big dollar item or if it's critical to function, if Doug hadn't been there overseeing that operation and being able to find out about that error while he was there and get that corrected, that could have been a considerably worse outcome. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very important for this to work. You can't just go online and get a quote. You need to know who it is you're working with, and the engineers need to be willing to put down the mouse and walk into the shop, walk into the factory.
And just adding to that, it's also key, which is a lot of times firms will just quote a part, be it a circuit board or a molded part, something like that. But the devil is in the detail, and that's where the engineers need to be. Circuit boards often have panels that hold them in place, and that means mouse bites, and you need to know where these little break-off tabs are and where are the test points that they're putting in. In molded parts, you need to know where the cooling lines are and where the ejectors are and where all the features that may have secondary implications on your design are. That requires the right partner overseas to make sure you're seeing all that information. It's best if you can be there, but we do it remote all the time too on there. But it's a matter of finding, so it isn't just a black hole that you're sending it over to and then you're getting parts back afterwards.
No, I mean, I think there's an overseas vendor that I like to use a lot that when you get an injection mold, you get a weekly report, you get an updated schedule, you get photos of the molds in progress. You're getting continuous updates proactively. You're not having to call them every day to try to, and your people aren't dodging your calls. You're not getting ghosted. So it's knowing who those vendors are a way that you can get the advantages without the risks.
And I think coming back to that large containment vessel, the shell that you had machined up out of ABS, I think the first ones were done in Mexico near the U.S. border. And then as we went to a second iteration and a little bit more refined and stuff like that at a higher volume, you were in Taiwan, if I recall correctly, but all under the same company. So the same engineers and the same expertise. They were just leveraging what equipment they had around the globe to make it.
Yeah, I think you got that a couple of the details backwards, and this is one of my favorite stories of working at Sunrise. So I'll go back to the beginning. It was a machined enclosure that the chunk of plastic that was being machined had to be 6 inches thick. This is about 4 inches thicker than anything that I have ever machined. 18 inches wide and 3.5 feet long. It was a huge slab of plastic.
Huge.
There were local vendors stateside who did just flat out no quote because of the size of the raw material they were starting with. But this supplier that I worked with partners with one of the companies that makes the plastic itself. So they were well set up to take sheets of this plastic and chemically weld it together into a very large chunk that they could then machine. Mm-hmm. And I think the one set of these pressure vessel components was going to be $50,000 and 5 weeks stateside. And through our network of working with one of these multinational fabricating companies, I ended up getting 3 sets for the same price 1 week faster. And as Doug said, that the initial prototypes came from Taiwan, which was their kind of higher tech facility, where they worked out the process for making the billets in a reliable way because it was a pressure vessel. We couldn't just put glue on there and hope it doesn't come apart. And they worked out the fixturing to get down into some of the deep recesses, the deep narrow recesses that were going to be challenging. And kind of once I had negotiated the final design with the engineers who were in contact with the Taiwanese facility, we could then copy and paste the process in the Mexico facility to shave even more money off of the components.
Wow, that's a great story. And I was going to ask for examples as my next question, just examples of how this has worked in the real world. And it sounds like that's a really fantastic example, Chuck. Do you guys have any other favorite stories? That was Chuck. I think you said that was one of your favorite stories to be able to tell. Do you guys have any other stories that you want to share, just about how this has worked to the benefit in the long run? This entire process.
Well, I can definitely say one area in medical device. As soon as, whether it be labware or true medical device, one of the first decisions to come around is cleanliness of the product and its testing. But if something is going in vitro and it needs to be sterilized, or if there's things that way, then now you're layering on another layer of complexity to make sure that the whole supply chain is one with that, because you have to have a controlled bioburden when you're getting the product to the sterilizer. They have to know exactly what they're getting is incoming. So that adds a vector that we've done with a lot of customers of saying, no, this vendor that this other vendor is planning on using does not have sufficient controls in place. You're opening, you would not be comfortable going that way. And so it's an area providing it. I also mentioned we've had products go to market that had, something seemingly small, like the world's smallest O-ring developed for it, and everything is fine. And then all of a sudden the customer calls and they've got some leaks. And it turns out the vendor that they selected, they decided to increase the number of cavitations and go from 6 cavities to like 32 cavities on that O-ring.
Oh, wow.
And you had parting line differences, for example, on that. In that example, this was after we were done on design, but naturally they come back and they're asking, why is it not working now? And you suddenly tease out that there's now more manufacturing variation. And in this case, there was parting line flash on the O-rings. So technically one could argue the O-ring didn't meet print since we didn't allow that, but it just wasn't something that was in our mindset, because when we had finished it, it was done on there. And so that's another good lesson if you get brought back in the real world, is what has changed since the product was launched or since you went through prototype development on there.
A very simple story that makes me happy is this is the first time in my career that I've worked for an engineering services company. I've worked for a lot of companies that manufacture their own stuff. And one of the things that's really satisfying to see is, there's a bunch of customers who keep coming back, that, we've done right by them before, and, they come back for new products. They come back and we help them fix a problem that, like Doug was just talking about, where a vendor does a change and we help them figure out what went wrong and why things aren't working, and we get the line back up again. And the thing that is just super satisfying about this job, it hasn't happened to me yet, but I know Doug was in the hospital with his mother, who was having a great deal of difficulty, and the doctors and nurses wheeled in something that he himself had designed and made to help treat his mother and help her recover. So that might be a little bit off topic, but that's why we do what we do. We want to make the world a better, healthier place.
It is nice to be a fly on the wall with your fingers crossed, hoping everything works well, and seeing that's a little bit beyond a formative or a summative test when you see it being used for real. And the nurse and doctor don't know, lead engineer or technical lead is 6 feet away watching on there and on a family member. So yeah, that is a unique event. But it also shows in that case, I knew the whole supply chain well on that, and I knew the partners. That particular device Chuck is referring to goes back to previous company I worked at before Sunrise on there. I hope all engineers have the opportunity to see their devices in use. But it does come back again on there as we started this off. We're humble enough to know there are times for experts to be brought in to supplement us, and there's a lot of expertise at the entire supply chain who have been making devices and parts day in and day out, and we want to make sure in those DFM reviews early on that their voice is heard.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Man, that's a really, really powerful story. Just about Doug, having that experience in a hospital, that is really an incredible example of just the work that you do. So, guys, as we begin to wrap up this conversation today, it's been a fascinating conversation and really, really good. At the end of the day, the reason for bringing in experts is to help empower the efforts of your team and maximize their efforts and what they're doing. So, what are some of the keys to making that happen for everybody across an entire project?
I think the humility that we're willing to say that there's things we need help on, being open to changes, that's critical. We're good customers to a lot of these vendors and these contract manufacturers that, if we take their advice, if we spend time working on the design, we make sure that they get the purchase order. We have given a lot of these contract manufacturers that have some of the sophisticated capacities that our customers often need, that we have given them business in the past, and so they want to keep us happy. So that we often get bumped if they're getting a bunch of calls from a bunch of people, we'll often get bumped the top of the list. And it's also gone in reverse before. There's one contract manufacturer that we've used before that got us design work. That was working with a new customer, and I think that history and that being a good business partner, and I think the really big thing is that with a lot of these companies that we've talked about, Sunrise has a history, and that's not something that you can't just show up with a checkbook and expect to get the exact same kind of consideration that I think we've earned with these people.
Well said.
And then as a complete counterpoint to Doug's story about his mother, which I think is one of the most moving stories I've ever heard any engineer tell, I was sitting in a dentist's office and I was getting an x-ray done. And there was a device used to help align the x-ray head to the sensor inside my mouth. And the hygienist it was a device I had designed, and the hygienist was using it wrong. And I attempted to explain to the hygienist the right way to use it. And I just got this nasty look. And she shook her finger at me and said, "I've been doing this for 10 years. Hold still." I went and got a new dentist for my very next checkup.
Nice story.
What an incredible story. Oh my goodness.
It shows the training and things, and it also shows that your devices can often be used in ways you never envisioned. And that comes back to the whole risk analysis on everything, and everything. A lot of things our UCD team will bring to bear on making sure that the human factors and the ergonomics are right, and that that it's intuitive to use. And those are areas where it's nice that we have in-house at Sunrise now. There was a day years back when those were areas of expertise we reached out to.
I think it's actually kind of interesting because I told that story as a bit of a joke, but I think it's interesting because the product isn't the chunk of plastic with the electronics inside. Mm-hmm. The product is the manufacturer making it right. It being packaged so it's shipped successfully and doesn't get damaged in transit. The human factors, user interface stuff that Doug was talking about. Can you read the display if it's something that needs to be used in a dark room? The training of the final operator, which was clearly something that broke down in the example I gave. And all of these things, when you look at the holistic system, and you can even get into stuff like, how do you eloquently handle RMAs when things go wrong? What is the service, the service manual look like? How serviceable is the device? There's a huge amount of work that goes into a successful product. Mm-hmm. And it would be very egotistical for any 100-person size company say, "Oh, we can do everything." But we know about all this other stuff, and we can pull it in as we need.
And as we said at the beginning of this, it's a global world. There's a lot of local expertise. We're blessed to have the local expertise that we have here in our contacts, but it is a global world, and we reach out globally every day on there. The key is knowing when and how to integrate that together so that it all nicely dovetails together to bring the product to market.
Well, fantastic stuff. I mean, yeah, you guys, I think, have done an incredible job explaining this today. Chuck Smith and Doug Browne. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Making Bright Ideas Work, a podcast by Sunrise Labs. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, lots of fun. Thank you.
And everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode of the program. We appreciate you joining us today. Of course, stay tuned for more episodes of the podcast. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more. But for my guests today, Chuck and Doug, I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for listening.